I'm glad you could all join us this evening. So we're here tonight to talk about protecting your family documents and your family artifacts. So I wanted to share with everyone two terms that we use, and a lot of times they get used interchangeably, and they're slightly different from each other, actually. So those terms are conservation and preservation. And if you take one thing away from this discussion tonight, we know that preservation is about preventing damage, and conservation is about correcting damage. We always want to try to prevent rather than have to work on an expensive cure, right? We've all heard that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. But we're going to talk a little bit about both tonight, both preservation and conservation, because both are things that you might wish to consider when you're looking at your family artifacts. So just some general tips. Some of you may already be familiar with this, but you definitely want to make sure you've got your space prepared before you get your original items out and about. You don't want pieces falling off the edge of the table, and make sure you've got clean hands. That doesn't just mean that you've washed them recently, but you also want to avoid lotions and perfumes, things that could damage your artifacts. There's a big debate about, do you handle stuff with gloves? Do you handle stuff without gloves? And that can really vary depending on what you're handling. You can handle paper without gloves. Your clean hands will not damage paper at all, unless that's a photograph. Photographs have a glossy surface on them that we call emulsion, and that reacts very poorly to the oils in your hands over time. So if you have photographs that are not in a frame, or if you have textiles particularly that are very, very fragile, you would want to consider using some gloves. We always recommend you keep things at a comfortable temperature and humidity. The biggest damage to your items is going to come from big swings in temperature or big swings in moisture that can often do things like activate dormant mold. When you're talking about your photographs or negatives, they like very, very low temperatures. You don't have to freeze them, but they do like it on the chilly side. And of course, you'd want to keep your things away from obvious sources of damage. If you know you've got a leaky pipe, for example, or keep them away from windows where they'll be exposed to a lot of sunlight. Try not to eat or drink when you're handling your original materials. You really don't want to attract bugs or mice, because they're going to do as much damage or more damage to your collection even than just regular handling. A lot of folks, your storage space might be your basement, your garage, your attic, and sometimes you do what you have to do. But if it's a thing you really care about, try to avoid those places that have those real extremes where they're not temperature controlled so well. Now, there's a couple of pictures here that shows some pretty severe damage. On the one side, we have the photographs that have adhered together, and you can see the person handling those is wearing gloves and using a special tool to try to separate those. And then on the other side, we see some paper documents with some what looks like potentially black mold. So if you've got really, really severe issues like this as you're coming across, we definitely recommend that you save those kinds of issues for a conservator. We want to make sure that we're protecting your items. You don't want to force them apart if they're stuck together. And you certainly don't want to put your own health at risk when there might be contamination like mold present. If you're not familiar, this is what mold looks like when it's super duper magnified. These particles are very, very small. You can, if you're very, very careful, vacuum them up with a HEPA filter vacuum, because those filters are small enough to catch those particles instead of spreading them all around. But it's definitely not something you want to be breathing in, particularly if you have some health concerns. So in a minute here, I'm going to show you some actual items from the collection at the Franklin Historical Society. And a lot of times when stuff comes into an institution, it comes in really rough shape, because when someone found it, the damage is already done. So if you find something like that, we really want to try to do no further harm. And a lot of times you can stop and think about what you want to do, but you'd only want to address something very urgently if you know that there's a possible health risk involved. If you can see that there's bugs, or you're worried about mold, it's gone furry, you don't want anyone to get sick. If you do need to contact a conservator, at the end of this presentation, I've included some links where you can find a certified professional conservator who deals specifically with the item in question that you have. And feel free to use those links. All the people there are vetted, professionally vetted. So so we're talking about things, you've discovered something and it's in really rough shape. So if that's the case, definitely leave that for a conservator, and they can treat things according to the type of material. It is a little bit more expensive to treat things than it is to prevent damage, but sometimes you can only do what you can do. So what are some simple things you can do to protect your things? You want to keep your stuff temperatures and humidity levels that are comfortable for a person, or if you remember Goldilocks, not too hot, not too cold, just right in the middle. Look for things that might cause future damage, like old tape or rusty paper clips. Try to gently remove those if you can. If items are large, you want to store them flat and supported. You don't want to hang or fold stuff. And if possible, try to put your stuff into folders and boxes, even if they're not acid-free. Protecting something in a box is definitely better than letting it get crushed. Acid-free is nice, but they are costly. So even a paper file box from Staples is definitely better than nothing. Actually, I'm going to stop sharing. So this is a picture of a conservator taking care of textiles here. But we actually have a live example for you here at the Historical Society. So if Anne will help me for the moment, I'm going to show you what we've done here to conserve this actual garment. Let me see if I can lift this. No, it doesn't really want to. Can you tilt the back of that up towards the, I'm going to try to tilt the camera down. Okay. So you can see that this is a box, a textile box, and we've done a few things in here. So we have covered these with acid-free paper that's going to buffer the material in this box. And as you can see, we've actually layered that. There are several garments in this box of different fabrics, and that's okay because there's a protective barrier in between each one. So we're storing them flat to protect them, and anywhere there's a fold or a crease, such as at the bottom of this garment, we've padded that with the same acid-free paper to prevent permanent creases and damage to that textile. And that's certainly an ideal way to do it. But if you have to hang it, if you have no choice but to hang it up, try and get a padded hanger to create as close to a shape of human shoulder in that garment as possible. So you're spreading that weight out and you're not causing a crease. Okay. Now, did I do it right this time? Can we all see the big slides? Okay.
Yep, you're good.
Fantastic. So yeah, that's correct. So what if you've got something and you want to hang it up and display it? and as you would if you're proud of something that came from your family. You want to make sure that you're avoiding sources of ultraviolet light like daylight and fluorescent lighting. Now you can, at places like Michael's, have an option to buy ultraviolet filtering, either glass or plexiglass, that you can put into your frames to protect those items. You can also do very simple things like turning off lights when you're not in the room, or making sure windows that face your items have light blocking curtains. You would want to use a mat board to protect this, that's acid free, or we would call it pH neutral, and it's usually you want to look for cotton, and it's something that has passed the photographic activity test, which means that when light hits it, it's not going to cause a chemical reaction to the artwork or document that you framed underneath it. When you go to a place like Michael's for framing, that's a question that you can ask them and they'll be able to tell you. And you want that mat so that the glass or plexiglass is not touching the surface of the item that you framed. You can hinge your document into your frame with a couple of safe methods, and it creates sort of a sandwich layer, which looks a little bit like this image here. So if we go from the left to the right, you get the frame, then the glass, then the mat board that's protecting your item, your artwork, which is on a piece of backing mat, a moisture barrier of some sort, and a dust cover. And that will allow you to protect both the front and the back of the document to the best of your ability. I'm going to briefly stop the share again, because we have a live example here to show you of one that, this is more an example of maybe what you might find if you found it sort of in your attic, right, in its original state. And we can come over to this one. Well, let's see. So this is, oh, it's upside down. That's what. Okay, so here is a framed certificate, and as you can see, this frame has been through the ringer a good bit. It's got some water damage. Pieces of it have cracked off. It's gorgeous. It was gorgeous when it was original. But you can see these marks on the edge of this document. This is what we call a tide line, which shows that at some point this document was exposed to water, which means we would want to be concerned about the potential for mold. And then on the back of this, you can see that it's backed with plain wood. And this was originally nailed in, and Anne and her lovely staff removed a bunch of nails out of this wood and a very rusty wire. So what we would do to fix this is very carefully, after we removed all the nails, remove this wood, which is very, very acidic, and then very, very carefully lift this document away from the glass. There is no mat on here, and so there's some concern that it might stick. So what I'm going to do is lift the entire piece of glass gently, carefully, so I can get one edge up. Carefully, carefully, carefully slide this right out of its frame. So we've freed this now, and we could begin to assess it, whether it needs to be flattened or vacuumed. And then Anne and her staff will get some acid-free folders to keep this flat and protected before they decide whether they want to put it on display. in a better frame than it originated in. I'm going to very carefully hand that to you. So what if you find an item like this and you're interested in donating it? We love that. But we especially love that when it comes with a story, right? Every institution has a mission statement. For the Franklin County Historical Society, that's to tell the story, by, for, and about folks who lived here in Franklin County. So we want to know, what do you know about this thing if you're interested in donating? What stories have gone down through your family? Or if you purchased it at a yard sale or an auction, where did you purchase it? Who did you buy it from? Because that sort of stuff is what gives us amazing stories to tell about our items. We always try to keep that information together with your things. You can either tuck it into the back of the frame or keep it in the box, with the letters, whatever it is you happen to have, but definitely to keep that history with it. So maybe if you're considering donating something, you still want to keep a copy for yourself. Now that we have access to scanning these days, that's so much easier to do, and anybody can do it themselves at home. There's just a couple of things you might want to know to make sure your digital backups are successful for making a copy and also the least damaging to your original item. You want to make sure the copy you're making is platform neutral, which means, for example, it can migrate when you upgrade your computer from computer to computer to computer, right? If you have a software that's just for Apple or software that's just for Windows, that's not going to be as useful to you as a software that will run on both kinds of computers, right? So the more neutral your software is, the more widely it can be used, the better when you try to move it from computer to computer. Especially important when you're scanning, don't use an auto feed. Every time you see a paper jam, you don't want to imagine that happening to your historical documents. So make sure you're laying it flat on a flatbed scan. And when you're saving these files, you want to save the same stories that you're sending along with your originals, right? Who, what, where, when, and put that in your file name or put that with your file so you have the information. The rule we use for backing up digital files, generally, we refer to as the 3-2-1 rule. 3 copies stored on 2 different types of media, and 1 of those copies is located somewhere off-site. So what does that actually mean? So the method that I use, I save 1 copy to my hard drive on my computer. I save 1 copy to a USB drive, a thumb drive, and I keep that, in my fire safe. And I email myself a copy so that there's a copy sitting in my email server. So if all else fails, I can go in and I can download it again. And that's really great for photographs. And I've the next few slides here, I've got some information on photographs, some information on textiles. These are all wonderful links that can give you some more places to get started, some basic information, some reading materials if you're interested. There's some great information at the National Archives and the Library of Congress, particularly about family papers. And for artifacts, we haven't talked too much about artifacts yet, and the reason why is they're pretty complex. But I do have an example here to show you. Rolling chairs are my nemesis. So this particular artifact is a bound book. Now, an artifact could be sort of any 3-dimensional object. It could be a piece of furniture. It could be a statue. It could be a child's toy. a piece of jewelry. So it's anything sort of generally a three-dimensional thing. It's not a single piece of paper. It's not a single photograph. This is a bound, it's called a watch book. It's almost like a diary. And it contains writing in iron gall ink on probably rag paper, linen rag paper. But what makes this the artifact is that it's all bound together. And inside of these pages are many different things. There are account statements, there are legal documents, there is personal poetry. It's a really wonderful snapshot of a person's life. So when you're evaluating an artifact, you want to look at what it is made of when you consider how you want to handle or treat it. Because this is largely paper, I would tend to treat it like a document, but there are a few things about it that make it special, namely its binding. And in this case, the binding consists, if I can show you very carefully, of a strip of glue, as well as some metal staples. And so while we would normally want to remove metal staples maybe as a source of rust, in this case, we don't necessarily want to do that because it's part of our binding. And so if you're thinking about conserving an artifact and you are looking at one of the conservators kind of on this list that you want to contact, think very carefully about the kinds of materials your item is made with, and that'll help you to select a conservator who can best help you. So if you're concerned about firearms, you want to look at a conservator who is good with metal and with wood, versus if you're looking at a child's toy and you want a conservator who is good with textile. And hopefully this presentation, not only recording, but the PowerPoint, Neil, if you can share that with everyone, those links will then be clickable, and they can take you out to those sites, and you can interact with that to your heart's content. I find it fascinating, and I'm glad that you all joined me here to hear a little bit more about it tonight. But at this point, I would love to open this up for questions. I've been talking for about half an hour now, so it's your turn. Is there anything any of you would like to ask me? So I can say that I've definitely had a grand time here exploring the Franklin County Historical Society. Especially, this is the first time I've been here when they're all decorated up for Halloween. So that's been pretty exciting for me.
I will, for everybody, I will see that this podcast gets put out on our website. You'll be able to click on it out there and see it. And then if you want to get any of the links, you'll be able to see them out there and write down the links and be able to go to the different areas of information. I thought this is very informative. I've learned some myself tonight.
Well, thank you all. And if you have any questions, you think of any questions, after the fact, feel free to email here to the Historical Society. They will make sure that I get your questions, and I'll be happy to respond to you with an answer anytime. Okay.
Yeah, I'd just like to mention one thing here for our next monthly meeting will be in November, and Matthew Wedd will be the speaker, and he is from the Conococheague Institute, and he's the new executive director there, and he's going to be discussing some of the updates and things that since he took over, what's going on up there at the Conococheague Institute. So that should be pretty interesting too. And that'll be in November, the last Thursday in November.